Hello, and welcome to POMA Does, a podcast produced by the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. We provide a voice for osteopathic medicine and share insights on issues important to osteopathic physicians, residents, and students, as well as those who embrace the osteopathic philosophy. POMA's mission is to promote the distinctive philosophy and practice of osteopathic medicine for our patients, our members, and the communities we serve. Thanks for tuning in.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the POMA Does podcast, sponsored by the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. I'm Dr. Angela Zawisza, a board-certified pediatrician and chair of the pediatric department at Lehigh Valley Health Network Schuylkill in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. I'm a 2007 graduate of Des Moines University College of Osteopathic Medicine, and I currently serve as president-elect and the communications pillar champion for POMA. Each summer, emergency departments treat injuries from water sports, biking, scooters, and more. Today, we'll cover prevention tips, common summer and fall sports injuries like overheating and overuse, as well as address trends in hot car deaths. This podcast episode is eligible for CME credits. To claim your AOA Category 1B credit, visit the webpage noted in this episode's description or visit the POMA Does podcast page on the POMA website. This podcast episode was developed entirely by POMA. None of the speakers or planners for this episode have any conflicts of interest to disclose. Now, let's get started with our two guests for today's episode. Today we have with us Dr. Robert Tomsho and Dr. Holly Stankewicz. Dr. Tomsho, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Rob Tomsho. I'm a board-certified emergency medicine physician. Went to University of New England, graduated in 2005. I'm currently the medical director of the emergency department and trauma program at Lehigh Valley Schuylkill.
Thank you. And Dr. Stankewicz.
Hi, I'm Holly Stankewicz. I am a board-certified emergency physician. I went to PCOM. I graduated in 2008, which is forever ago. And I'm currently the program director for the emergency medicine residency program at St. Luke's in Bethel.
Thank you so much to you both for joining us today. And I know we're winding down summer. School starts in just a couple of weeks, and I really don't want to think about that at the moment, but we still have some time left, some people that are eking out the last few weeks of summer. And so still some time left to discuss tips to keep everybody safe over the summer. But of course, my main question was, what are the most common injuries you've seen in the emergency department this summer, and anything really super interesting? Dr. Tomsho, if you wanted to start.
Sure. So we do see a fair amount of injuries that are related to summer activities. We are a level 4 trauma center. A couple of the biggest injuries that we've seen, there's a lot of off-road dirt bike facilities around here, and we've seen several injuries related to that. And the injury patterns are all dependent on how well the rider's protected. So we had one patient who had significant injuries, open fractures, pneumothorax, head injury, but they didn't have any real protection. And then I had another patient had a very similar injury, location, same track, and they were perfectly fine, but they came in a full protective bodysuit. It was padded everywhere. And I think he had a broken finger. So we've seen those kind of injuries. And the other injury I've actually seen several of 3 in the last month was something as simple as a nursemaid's elbow that, we're seeing because of kids out on playgrounds swinging from, the play equipment. So we see those kind of injuries as well.
Thank you so much. Dr. Stankewicz, what about you?
We have also seen our fair number of injuries related to biking and things like that. We also, because of where we're located, we're in a little bit more of a city type environment. So pedestrians getting struck by cars, bicycles getting struck by cars, which I would completely agree. A big indicator for us is like how much protection were they wearing? Were they wearing a helmet? Because not wearing a helmet is probably one of the worst things for kids, especially, around here riding bikes where there are cars that are going to. We've seen a lot of Lyme disease this year. That was a big thing for us, especially, we have a lot of woods around here. So kids playing outside, and then pool injuries related to water. I was talking to my residents yesterday, and they were saying this year they just noticed how many injuries they were seeing. Kids jumping in pools, diving into pools that were too shallow, slipping and rolling into the pool, and, just a lot more injuries related to water safety things.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, as a hospitalist in Schuylkill County, sometimes see some of the same injuries. We observe patients overnight in the hospital. We did have one patient who was riding on an ATV track, or dirt bike track, and he had later found out it was a $700 helmet, and apparently it was worth every single bit of those $700 because he walked away with a minor concussion and a crack down the helmet. And there was actually video of his fall, and I couldn't believe that he walked away from that fall. So it says a lot for sports equipment and investment in sports equipment even. $700 certainly sounds like a lot of money, but when it protects your child's life, it's certainly well worth it. So I didn't even think about Lyme disease, as a consequence, so to speak, of summer. It makes sense, obviously, but it's great that the kids are outside playing outside and everything like that, and kind of joke that my children have been feral all summer because they've been in the woods and doing the same thing, but making sure that they have bug spray on and tick protection, that sort of thing. So some of the most common and some of the most devastating injuries that I think the three of us have seen in the summer have been related to water safety and drowning in particular. What are some tips that you can pass on to our providers that are listening to this episode that they can then pass on to their patients to help prevent drownings in the first place and other water injuries?
That's a great question. And I think, as a parent, simple things. If you're going to get a pool, don't put a pool until your kids know how to swim. And if you do have a pool or you're near a body of water, if they aren't able to swim, you need to really keep your eyes on them. And that means as parents, you can't be out drinking while your kids are by the edge of the water. Life jackets, a symbol. Right? A lot of people go out boating and, there's a law. You have to have a life jacket for every person on a boat. But many times we don't see people wearing those life jackets. In the state of Pennsylvania, the law says if you're under the age of 12 on a watercraft, you need to have a life jacket on. And that's hugely important. And it's certainly if you don't swim, you need to protect yourself. You need to have that kind of protection. So I think it's important that all those safety measures are in place around water, keeping an eye on kids, making sure they can swim, getting them swim lessons, and just being very vigilant.
Dr. Stankewicz, do you have anything to add?
I couldn't agree more. I think being watchful, because it only takes a second, turning around to put sunscreen on one of your children while the other one is behind you is potentially really dangerous. And you don't think about it. Nobody's intentionally being a bad parent. You're trying to do the right thing for your other child, but it takes just seconds for something like that to happen. And I agree with the life jackets. It's not even just on the boat. It's on the side too. If you're on a dock anywhere near the water and it's a child, they need to have a life jacket on. And I think the other thing, a lot of parents have pool parties for their kids, which is awesome. Have a party for their birthday, hire a lifeguard. Hire somebody that is going to be there to watch them and dedicated to watching them. My daughter is now 16 and she's done that for a few parties where she doesn't know the kids. So she's like completely unbiased and she'll be there to watch to make sure. And then the parents are watching too, but they at least have a little bit of time that they can take their eyes off the pool for a minute and talk to somebody. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a huge thing. Even with kids at pools, I have 3 teenagers now, and when they would have kids over, you got to remind them, you can't be diving into my pool. Even though it's 7 or 8 feet, it's not 7 or 8 feet everywhere. And these kids, especially teenage boys, want to dive, they want to jump, and it's always in the shallow end. And so they have to be very careful because you do risk certainly devastating spinal injury, head injury, paralysis, or death. So huge. And the other thing I would say is in lakes, we see all the time people jumping into lakes from cliffs or rocks off a boat. If you don't know what's under the water, you have to be very careful because water levels change, right? So what today might have been a safe jump, tomorrow there's a rock there because the water level dropped 3 feet. So you really have to be very careful with jumping and diving as well.
I will add just some personal experience. I grew up in the Midwest and I'm actually visiting family in the Midwest at the moment, and we're on a giant lake. I grew up hearing my parents, bang into my head, you need a life jacket, you need your life jacket, you need your life jacket. And we've seen so many instances where the life jacket wasn't on and, tragedy happened and that sort of thing. And one thing I will say is here, I'm not as familiar with the lakes in Pennsylvania, but here in Missouri, boating while intoxicated is a huge issue. And so protect your children. It's the same thing as drinking and driving, no drinking and boating and that sort of thing. And people don't really think about it. You're on vacation, you're here to have a great time. There's usually alcohol involved with that, but the driver of the boat still needs to remain sober. And so any specific injuries that you've seen related to like personal watercraft use, like jet skis and that sort of thing? Maybe it's just the trend down here, but I feel like they're not always using their brain when they're on the personal watercraft and cutting too close to other boats or people that might be in the water and that sort of thing. So any comments on that from either of you?
That is huge. And one of the things we see today is so many young people on jet skis. And even now, some of these jet skis are so powerful, they're towing kids or other people behind the jet ski. So I think there's a couple things. One, I would tell anyone who has a boat or operates a personal watercraft, you should take a safety training training class. First of all, that's not required, but it should be. And it's not a hard course. It's online. You do it in a couple hours. But two, these kids are on these jet skis, which go pretty darn fast. They're young. You have to be watching out for the person in the water, that you might just have bombing above the water. So we do see collisions with people that are in the water. We see people that were thrown off of personal watercraft. And even though it's water, when you're hitting that water at 30, 40 miles an hour, it's like hitting concrete. And so you can very easily have a fracture, injury, or potentially drown. So again, the personal flotation device, if you're towing behind a boat, a skier or a wakeboarder or even a tuber, you need somebody's eyes on them. That's actually supposed to be required. And more lakes, they check for that. So the guy operating the boat that's looking ahead, you need somebody else on that boat or on that personal watercraft looking behind you at that person who's being towed to know if they fall off or if they're in trouble. You should have good hand signals and things so you can communicate with that person. So those are things I think that would help, but you could certainly see some very devastating injuries for sure.
I agree. And I think people falling off of, whether it's falling on water skis or falling off a tube, just being aware of your environment. And I think being aware of the age of the kid, because, older kids obviously want the experience and the thrill of flying through the air and stuff. Little kids can't handle that. And so just being aware of who's riding behind you and what can they handle when they're back there realistically and safely.
Yeah. We actually just had an experience yesterday. My niece was wakeboarding. She's 10 now. And she had a helmet on. There's actually speakers in the helmet. My family really invested. This is something that they decided they wanted to invest in. And we have a dedicated spotter and all that stuff. And then there's somebody on a jet ski riding like 20 feet behind her, trying to catch the wake of the boat. Okay. But if she fell, he would have been right on top of her. Luckily, that didn't happen. My father might have gotten a little upset with him and that sort of thing. But it's just, cognizant of even when you are doing everything correct, we talk about defensive driving, also talk about defensive boating as well, just to protect the people that you're towing behind. So
I gotta tell you, I love that idea of the helmet in the water. You never see that. I spent a lot of time on the water and I can tell you, I've probably never seen anyone with a helmet, but we should. And that's huge. Teaching, kids young to do that. It's kind of like skiing. When I learned to ski in the 80s, we never wore helmets. Nope. Today, everyone wears a helmet. So, getting that out now and starting at a young age, I would think that may change over the years and we start to see more helmets in the water, which is smart.
I think with anything, if you start your kids doing it from a very young age, I don't have a single complaint from my kids about wearing their helmets while they're biking because they just know that's the rule. And it's never been, I was allowed to do it and go without a helmet and now I have to wear my helmet. This is how it works and that's it. So starting really young, I think is really important.
It's so funny you say that. My youngest son, who's now going to be, I can't believe 16, when he was little, again, we spent a lot of time in the water and we called him Mr. Safety because he went everywhere with his life jacket on. He walked outside, the life jacket's on. He got anywhere near the edge of the pool. Oh, gotta get my life jacket. And you put his life jacket on, even if he wasn't going in the water. And so you're right. You just got to reinforce it early.
One of the other things, kind of moving away from the water sports and the bikes and that sort of thing, and moving into one thing that we unfortunately see too much of in the summer is deaths from heat stroke by children being left in the car. I did check as of this morning. Actually, there have been 21 hot car deaths in children this summer, which fortunately is decreased from this point in time last year. I believe there were 39 total last summer, but still way too many, 21 deaths that could have been prevented. Any prevention tips that our providers could pass on to their families to help prevent these deaths from happening?
We had a rental car, this is probably 2 years ago, and every time you stopped to get out of the car, it would beep. It would show you this picture, like, check your back seat. And my kids were a little bit older then, and I was like, this is the dumbest thing ever. And then I thought about it, and I was like, actually, what a smart thing to do. Because it was annoying enough that you looked at it.
Right.
It made you think twice before you got out of your car. Because I can't imagine how devastated left my child. Like, I just, making it part of your practice to always look in your back seat before you get out makes a difference.
I agree. These new cars do warn you. And I thought the same thing. Well, this is ridiculous until I left something as simple as a bottle of milk in my car, right? That's a bottle of milk. That could have very easily been a child. And you have to really think about it. And even today, cars are pretty safe, right? You can't lock your keys in your car. Well, you actually can. And I think the statute of limitations is probably gone. My son is now 19. But when he was about 2 years old, he was in a car seat. I knew he's in the back seat. We were going down to look at ducks in a pond. It wasn't a terribly hot day, thankfully, but you think you can't lock your keys in the car. I got out of the car. I had gym shorts on, so no pockets. So I'm like, we're just going over there. I'm going to just toss my keys into the console. So as I'm tossing my keys, I'm closing my door. Well, the way the keys hit, the car locked. So now my car is locked. Now, the window was down a little bit in the back, and it's a fall day. It wasn't hot, He's sitting in the middle, but he's not yet strong enough to push to let himself out of his car seat. And I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, my cell phone's locked in the car. I can't so you could very easily lock keys in a car too, and very easily be in this situation. So, you have to just be cognizant. You have to always be looking and checking that back seat. And, 20 deaths or whatever you mentioned, that's way too much. It's a terrible thing. And people don't think, I'm just running into this store. They're 4 years old or 5 years old. When we grew up, that's what the parents did.
Right.
You can't do that today. And the temperature of the car will go from 70 degrees to 100 degrees in minutes. And with that, so does body temperature. So it's just very dangerous.
I think you're 100% right. Even something that you think is only going to take a minute, like I'm just going to run in the gas station and grab a cup of coffee. What if you trip and fall? What if something happens in the grocery store? It could end up being 15 minutes. And that's enough time for that car to get hot.
Absolutely. Most of the deaths I've read did occur in Texas. It's naturally a hotter part of the country, but there were some on the East Coast, actually. I think there was one in Maryland recently. In Pennsylvania, you don't really think of it as something that happens frequently in our area, but we've had some really hot days this summer. That certainly could happen at any point in time. The other thing I was noticing, hearing stories over the years as a trend is the parents were out of their usual routine. And, instead of one spouse taking the child to daycare that day, it was the other spouse, supposed to be taking the child to daycare, but went directly to the office instead because they weren't used to taking the child, those sorts of things. So I think those reminders from the cars themselves are brilliant. I think it's important for parents, if they are out of their routine, especially in those younger stages of childhood when their parents are especially tired, set alarms, hey, check the back seat, and just really be cognizant when their routines do change that they are at increased risk for, something tragic happening. So hopefully it's a trend that will continue to decrease over the next couple of years, or, zero would be great, obviously. So the other thing that I wanted to touch on in today's podcast episode is we are rapidly heading into our fall sports season. I'm sure my sons have started soccer practice already. I'm sure football practices are starting already, and the dreaded two-a-days and whatever it is that they're doing now. And what are some things that parents can do to prevent injuries during the conditioning season for fall sports and then through the fall sports season itself?
I love this question because I'm the parent of 3 fairly athletic kids. They're all teenagers, and you see it. And on the side, I work with professional athletes as well in hockey and motorsports. And it's a lot different today. When we were kids, you did a sport and you did another sport. Today, these kids pick one sport. They have to stick with it, or they, get thrown off the team. So they're doing it all year round. So just that repetition. And you're a pediatrician, so you could probably speak to this better, but they're developing. And someone who's a pitcher or a soccer player, for example, my youngest plays ice hockey and has already broken a hip. I mean, these are things that, it's the continual use. I think as parents, we have to stop thinking every one of our kids is the best athlete out there and they're all going to get scholarships. They're not. You need to allow them to rest. You need to allow them to take a break. We really shouldn't be pushing them as much as we do. And I see the parents in the ER all the time. When can they get back? Let's not even think about that right now. Yeah. They're injured. Yeah. Let's get them through their injury. And so I think we have to get out of that mindset, and we have to stop pushing our kids as much. I think we need to give them time to recover. They need to stay well hydrated. They need good rest. Again, when we were little, we had start sports in August. That was still your last month of summer. Now they're starting in August. And so they're going to get injuries. We just have to, I think, do a better job making sure they're staying in shape, making sure they're getting rest, making sure they're not getting those overuse injuries that can clearly happen.
I couldn't agree more. I have 4 children and they all play a lot of sports. And some of the sports, to your point, go like almost year round. They play multiple sports. So like sometimes they're doing football and lacrosse at the same time. So they're doing like a lot of it. But when the heat comes, that is a different animal entirely. And I think for my boys in pads, and it's hot, they are losing a lot of water. So I think making sure that you're hydrating the kid, not just on that day, but making sure you're hydrating before. So, 2 or 3 days before, make sure they're getting all that fluid in there, whether it's water, Gatorade, whatever you're giving them, but like something that they're getting that fluid and the rest they need for it. And then day of, like some of these lacrosse tournaments, it's 100 degrees outside and they are in full pads, helmets, pads, arms, gloves, everything, making sure that after that game, in between, while they're playing, drink, all that stuff. But afterwards, get those cold towels, get them cooled off, get them in your car, blast the air conditioning on them, make sure that they cool off so that they're able to go back out and do something. And then in the evening, take a break. You can sit in the pool for a little bit, sit in your hotel and watch a movie, but take a break, because I agree. Sometimes that overuse, like you want to do all the time, sometimes a better option is to do and then rest. And then that will be more effective.
To that point, I think we have to get our kids to recognize that, right? Like, it's okay for you to say, I'm tired today. It's okay for you to say, maybe I can't go tonight because I'm beat. Because it's when they let that guard down and when they're not rested, that's when they're going to get injured. And so I agree. The nutrition, the hydration, even teaching your kids to just monitor the color of your urine. So they can tell, am I drinking enough, not drinking enough? I mean, it sounds stupid, but that's the best way to tell if we're dehydrated, right? So those are great points.
I think that's funny because when we go to the tournaments for lacrosse in the summer and they're long tournaments, I'm making sure they actually do pee. I'm like, okay, how much did you pee in this tournament? Because I want to know so that you are done. Yeah, it's a big thing. We don't think about it as often as we should. And I know for some of the sports for my daughter, for girls lacrosse, they actually had mandatory water breaks on those really hot days in the middle of the games. They would play, instead of doing, like a 10 or 15 minute half, they would do 5 minutes and take a mandatory water break, everybody off the field, get a drink, and then everybody back on. And the girls are only wearing goggles and the boys in these full on pads.
That's another thing I never understood. Both of my kids play lacrosse and my son is decked out in full armor and my daughter's in goggles that don't even have lenses, and they get whacked with a ball and with a stick too. So I don't understand how they don't get any padding. That's another podcast.
That's not good. Yeah. I've always wondered that myself. I have all boys, but they play soccer and sometimes they scrimmage against girls soccer teams. You have to watch those girls, guys. They're fierce and they're going to be out there, playing hard and everything like that. So why they're less protected on the lacrosse field does not make sense to me, because sometimes I feel like they're even more fierce than boys are. So yeah, I was listening to you guys talk and I'm thinking about my own kids playing sports and everything like that. And sometimes you really have to teach them as the parent, hey, you're tired. You have been doing this for however many days in a row. It's hot. You are tired. You need to take a rest. These are the signs that I'm seeing, because they'll argue with me. Oh, no, I'm fine. I want to play, which I can appreciate, but you really need to take a rest day. I'm putting my foot down as the parent that you need to take a rest day. And then hopefully in the future, my oldest is only 13. So hopefully in the future, they will remember those words of wisdom from their dear old mom. So yeah. And I never thought about monitoring, like teaching them the color of their pee and to look at that, because they just go and they don't pay attention whatsoever. So, I'll start asking them like, hey, what color is your pee today? And they'll probably give me some side eyes and some eye rolls and stuff, but that's okay. Making sure they're hydrated. You were mentioning overuse injuries as well. I've even heard of teenagers in high school baseball having to have Tommy John surgery because, they're pitching so much and that sort of thing. And yes, we have rules in terms of pitching, but my kids play Little League as well. And there were kids on their teams that were playing travel ball as well. So yeah, they pitched 80 pitches for travel ball a couple of days ago, but they didn't pitch for Little League. So they're on a rest and that sort of thing. And it can get the monitoring can get really dicey, I think, sometimes. And you really have to be careful, even as something as low impact, usually as baseball, to make sure that they're not getting overuse injuries and that sort of thing. So even baseball can be harrowing, as you have probably seen. My son was playing at senior league level this year, and one of his teammates hit the ball and it bounced off the inside of his bat, came right up and hit his face, and he had a slight orbital fracture and that sort of thing just from a foul ball. So it's really the times when you least expect it, I think, are the times when the injuries actually happen, because you can do a lot of things to prepare for them and prevent them, but it's those ones that kind of sneak right by you that you always have to watch out. Do either of you have any other pearls of wisdom, I guess, for our providers listening today to impress upon their patients to help decrease injuries over the summer and into the fall?
I think just a couple of little things. That I have 4 kids and it's not always easy to monitor everything that's going on all the time, but little things like making sure they know to put sunscreen on and, making sure that if you hear thunder, get out of the pool. Like little things like that. I think that they sometimes are like, oh, it's far away, I'm fine. I'm like, no, we're not taking a chance on that. It's time. You just get out. You do what you're supposed to do. And listening to authority. If a lifeguard tells you to do something, if you're at the beach or at a pool, they're there to protect you, and, respect that and do what you're told, because that's really important for their safety.
Yeah, I know. I think that's great advice. And the only other thing I would say, again, I have 2 boys and 1 girl, and, I was always my boy's best friend, right? I have to remember. And so they always treated me like a pal. At some point you have to say, listen, I'm your friend, but I'm your father first, right? And so you have to really hound on them. I understand as my teenagers get a little older, they're going to probably experiment with alcohol, right? They're going to do that stuff. You have to make sure that if they're going to do that, it's a safe way. It's not around a pool. It's not going swimming after you've been partaking in that. You have to have that open relationship, regardless of what it is with sports, so that they're honest with you. You don't want to be that parent is driving them to excel in a sport sport, but maybe they don't want to. You have to have an honest, open relationship with your children. And I think if you do that, you start educating them at a very young age, the relationship you have with them as they grow, they're going to be honest with you and they're going to take some of what you've taught them and hopefully remember that when they decide, hey, I'm going to a party at a pool at my friend's house and there's liquor, right? They're going to say, hey, I'm not going to be diving into a pool after I had 2 or 3 beers, right? So I think those are things that it's good communication and teaching at a young age.
Yeah, my boys have heard more than once. I had a patient one time that had this, so you could do that. But this is why I don't want you to do that sort of thing. And we actually did a whole podcast one time on the perils and joys of being a doctor's kid. And that definitely made an appearance. But yeah, I agree. Communicating, well, no, you can't do this, but this is why I don't want you to do this. And that if they understand the reasoning behind it, then hopefully it will translate to other situations. There's actually something that I learned. My kids are in Scouts and they have, whenever there's pool time in Scouts, they have the buddy system and you have to have a buddy in the pool and you have to know where your buddy is at all times. And it's great for large crowds in the water. But even I think if you're having friends over, your kids are having friends over to swim and that sort of thing, I think even making sure that they have a buddy in the pool, even a smaller setting, it could be really helpful in terms of knowing where your buddy is. They always say that drowning is silent. And so they're not going to scream for help. They're not going to splash around most of the time and that sort of thing. And the buddy system seemed to work pretty well in terms of knowing where your friend was at all times. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners. As always, you can go to our website or go to the link that's in the podcast description to claim your AOA Category 1B credit. And thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of POMA Does. Be sure to subscribe to POMA Does wherever you listen to your podcasts and tell your friends and colleagues to tune in. Learn more about osteopathic medicine and POMA on our webpage, www.poma.org, and join the conversation on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Or email us at poma@poma.org. We'd love to hear from you. Join us next time for another edition of POMA Does.